And so good evening. You're catching us later here on this recording here on YouTube. We are in Revelation again. We're in chapter 11. That's where we're going to be tonight. So we'll go ahead and get our Bibles open there. I will go ahead and share my screen and we will get into this passage tonight. Let me start by saying that this particular passage that we're going to be reading in chapter 11 is not an easy one to grasp. It's not an easy one to understand, but and that doesn't just my opinion. I've read commentaries. I've read different scholars who have all sorts of different opinions, and the opinions are exponentially large when we look at this. But they are in agreement that this is a tough passage. It's a difficult one. So let me go and give you what I consider to be the setting, the more accurate setting with this. Remember that as far as where we are in the 7 years of tribulation, we're measuring them in terms of the 21 judgments that are divided into 3 different parts. There are the 7 seal judgments that come first. There are the 7 trumpet judgments that come second, and then there are the 7 bowl judgments that come last. Okay, so we are right now in between trumpet 6 and trumpet 7. So where that is right now, that's kind of where the timeline has been left off. But here's what happens. Chapter 10, we kind of pause. It's like John pushed pause, and he introduces another event that kind of happens at the same time these bowls or these trumpets are sounding. And that is, he gets to take he sees the worship, he sees this book that this angel has, and he has to eat the book, makes his stomach bitter, it's sweet in his mouth. He's told that he has to continue to preach. Okay, so now in chapter 11, we go back to the first part of the tribulation. So we are back to the opening rounds of the 7 years tribulation. And that's where we'll begin in verse 1. So we'll go ahead and start reading here in verse 1. John writes, "Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, 'Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship it.'"
That's just the way I wanted it.
But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before the God of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. These have power to shut heaven, so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy. And they have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. Okay, so couple of things that we need to go back and we need to understand here. And again, here's where the translators and here's where the scholars are just scatter all over the place. When we talk about the measurements here, John is given a reed like a measuring rod, and an angel commands him to measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. There are many scholars, many commentators who believe that this is figurative. They believe it's spiritually significant, but they do not hold to a literal temple. Or they will say this is a temple that represents heaven. But I think the best rule of thumb to go in understanding chapter 11 is to take as much literally as possible.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So when he says, the angel says to measure the temple of God, he's talking about the temple of God that would be in Jerusalem. Now, a couple of problems with that, aren't there? Number one, right now, there's no temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so that means, and that would imply that the temple is going to have to be rebuilt at some point.
Right.
Well, if we go back and we compare the prophecy from Daniel, and we look at Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27, Daniel 9 and 27, and I'm going to put this up on the screen so we can take a look at this. We'll see the passage here. It says, he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So here I want you to take a look at verse 27, and I want you to see the 1 week and then the middle of the week. Okay, so this he here would be parallel to the man of sin, the beast from the sea that we're about to read in chapter 13, the rider on the white horse from chapter 6. He's known popularly as the Antichrist, but I try not to use that term because John doesn't use it. So I use those words, man of sin, beast from the sea, rider on the white horse. Those are the words that Daniel will use. Those are the words that the prophets will use. Those are the words that John uses. So that's who we're talking about right here in verse 27. He shall confirm a covenant or a contract with many for 1 week. But notice what the contract is about. Look at the next sentence. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. So notice the sacrifice and offering. There's one group that does that has as their system sacrifices and offerings, and those are the Jews. And so there's an implication there that there's a temple, that the temple has been rebuilt, and that the sacrificial system of offering the blood of bulls and goats and sheep and all of that is going to be back in place. This is going to be the contract that is going to be struck with the Jews for 1 week, the nation of Israel. So there's going to be a temple that's going to be rebuilt. The sacrificial system is going to be put in place so that the Jews can continue to do that and continue to practice their religion. Okay, so they're able to do that. Now the agreement was for 1 week, and that would be the parallel to 7 years. So you see the difference with the 7 years of tribulation. Okay, but he says in the middle of the week, he'll bring an end to that. So halfway at 3.5 years, that deal is out the window. He breaks it. Okay, and the reason he breaks it is because he will establish himself as the God of the world that everybody is to worship. So there's not going to be any more religion of any type except to worship the man of sin, the rider on the white horse, the beast from the sea. Okay, so that's what this is referring to. Okay, so when we go back and we look at chapter 11, Revelation 11, and we look at verse 1, that temple is what's in view. Okay, so the temple has been rebuilt, and so they're to measure the temple. But in the New Testament, in the Greek language, there are 2 words that are translated temple. One talks about refers to the entire area of the temple. So that would be the place of worship, the most holy place, the holy place, and the outer courts. So that would be the court of the Gentiles, and all the rest, the court of women, all of that would be one. That's one word. Hieron is the Greek word, but that's not the word that's used here. The word here is the word naos, which refers to the inner sanctuary. So it's referring specifically to the holy place and the most holy place. And that is where, in the most holy place, remember, that's where the ark was. That signified the presence of God. The holy place was where the sacrifices were brought. That's where the altar was. That's where the incense was offered up before God. So that whole system is going on. Okay.
Well, they're not going to have the actual ark, though, are they?
Oh, you're going to be in such a big surprise, Jack. You just keep watching, keep listening, because we will show you. This book reveals where the ark is. Okay.
Oh,
It reveals where the ark is. So the answer is, in this temple, no ark. Okay, no ark. All right. So, and there's a very good reason for that. But I'm not going to give that up. We're just going to keep reading. And if you want to read ahead, go right ahead and read ahead, and see if you can find where the ark is. Okay. So he says, measure the temple of God, the altar, but notice what else? Those who worship there. So what is it that John is measuring, do you think? Make sure you're unmuted before you jump in with a thought. What is he measuring when he says measure these three things? Measure the temple, the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, the holy place. Measure the altar and measure those who worship there. Let me add a couple of things. Do you think that everybody already knows the dimensions of the temple? And do you think everybody already knows the dimensions of the altar? So keep that in mind. So what is it that John is measuring here? Anyone want to venture a guess? Told you it's a hard chapter. The key to it is those who worship there. So if you already know the measurements and the dimensions of the temple, and you already know the measurements and the dimensions of the altar, that leaves one thing left to measure those who worship there. Now, does that mean that John's running out with a tape measure and saying this guy's 5'2", this guy's 5'7"? Is that the measurement, or is he measuring something else?
Would it be like the fire code? How many people can be in there?
It could be. It could be a fire code. But I think the thing there is, what is, if the one thing that you don't know is those who worship there. It's interesting that it's the ones worshiping, not anybody else. He doesn't necessarily say that there's a number capacity, like, make sure there's only so many people in here. But I think it sounds like he's measuring the worship that's really going on there. Measure them, measure and see. Are they doing everything by the book? Are they doing everything with the right heart attitude? Are they doing these things because of their fear and their reverence of the true God? Or measure that and measure them. So that's kind of an interesting look there as you look at that. But now, just add more onto this, verse 2, leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, because it is given to the Gentiles. So remember that the outer courts, that's where the Gentiles could go on the Temple Mount. If you go back and you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gentiles were allowed in a certain area of the temple courts. And so they could go there, but they couldn't go into the holy place or the most holy place. They couldn't get too close to that because they were Gentiles. They were not Jews. So John is told, don't measure that because it's been given over to the Gentiles. Now, here's what's interesting now. Now, this is where things get tricky, okay? It says, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Now, just very quickly, somebody do the math. How long is 42 months? Three and a half years. Okay, it's going to be 3.5 years, isn't it? Okay, so 3.5 years, they will tread the holy city underfoot. Now, quick question, what is the holy city referring to? Do we know what the holy?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Okay, so they are going to tread the holy city underfoot for 3.5 years. Now, remember that we are talking about 7 years of tribulation. Okay, so we see that those 7 years are clearly delineated. They're cut in half. There's the first 3.5 months, and there's the second 3.5 months. Okay, so notice the wording here in verse 2. They will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. So the question is that the first half of the 7 years or the last half of the 7 years?
Probably the first half.
Okay, you might say first half, but here's the other part to this. Looking at verse 3, you see a slight difference. Verse 3, the angel says to John, "And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth." 1,260 days. How long is that?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. Okay, again, the question, is that the first 3.5 years or the last 3.5 years?
The first 3.5 years.
And okay, so if that's the first 3.5 years, then looking at the Gentiles treading the holy city underfoot, they didn't do it for 1,260 days, but the angel takes a different tack. He describes that as 42 months. So I would suggest to you that instead of the Gentiles treading the holy city underfoot during the first 3.5 months of the tribulation, it's the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. It's the last 3.5 years during the Great Tribulation. And that seems to fit a little bit better with what's going to happen during the Great Tribulation. Because remember what's going to happen with this beast from the sea in Revelation 13, the man of sin, the rider on the white horse that we call the Antichrist. Remember that he is going to set it up as we look at Daniel 9:27 again. Remember, he is going to be, notice this, on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So what Jesus says when he's talking to his disciples about the end times, he says, now when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the temple where he ought not to be, as spoken by Daniel, and he says, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay, because what that means is this guy, this beast, this Antichrist, this man of sin is going to step into the temple. He's going to go into the most holy place. He's going to declare that he's the one who is God and no one else is to be worshiped. And if anyone else is worshiped, is going to try to worship anything else other than him, they're doing so at the risk of their own lives. And so there is this trampling then of the holy city, Jerusalem. It's not going to be holy anymore because it's going to be this center where this guy, the most evil person has established himself and trying to declare himself to be God and demanding the worship of the world. Okay, so that seems to happen. That's going to happen in the last 3.5 years. And so that fits a little bit better with the Gentiles trampling the city underfoot.
That's kind of the kickoff for the last 3.5 years.
Okay, so going back then, now we look at these 2 witnesses, and they are in Jerusalem, the holy city. They are preaching for 3.5 years, 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Okay, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before the God of the earth. So let me break this down and kind of look at this a little bit as to what they are going to be doing. What is
Well, Pastor-
referred to by the two olive trees and the two lampstands. Go ahead, Jack.
Are the 144,000 there with the two witnesses?
Okay, let me give some explanation to this. Okay, these two are going to have the responsibility to declare the truth of who Jesus is. That's their responsibility. He is the Son of God. He is Messiah. He is the King of the Jews. And everyone who believes in him has everlasting life. You will not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay, so that's going to be their job. That's going to be their responsibility. And so they've taken this message. That's why they are the lampstands and the two olive trees. They are bringing this news to the world. Now, it seems as though just, and we don't have a verse that directly links this, but since these two are in Jerusalem, and since you see the 144,000 that Jack mentioned from chapter 7, who are sealed with the mark of God and are thus impervious to any attack by the Antichrist, the beast, or anyone else, it seems as though these two witnesses may have been in initial contact with some of those 144,000, that maybe those 144,000, some of them, many of them, we don't know, came and heard their message, believed in Jesus, and received the gift of everlasting life. And then they were called, summoned to be those preachers, to be those witnesses, to take the message of the gospel out to all the corners of the world. And so those 144,000, 12,000 from 12 tribes have been given this privilege, this responsibility. There is likely to be a connection between them and between these two witnesses.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not saying that that's what happened. Okay, but it seems as though there is a connection. Nobody can prove in Scripture that exchange, or that any of those 144,000 were sitting in a stadium or sitting in a synagogue, and these two witnesses came into Jerusalem and said, Jesus is Messiah, and we'll show you. And these guys all believed, and they went out and said, we're called by Jesus to be his witnesses, and we're going out to the world. We don't have a passage in Revelation that speaks to that. Okay, so I want to make that, I want to make that clear. Okay, so we don't have that. But what it seems is there's probably a connection somewhere in there. There's some parallels going on, is the point. Are there angels that rounded them up? You need to go back and reread chapter 7 to see if that happened. I don't think they were rounded up. They were sealed and protected. I think that's what you'll find in chapter 7. That's what the angels were doing. Now,
they're going throughout the whole world, right?
Now, another issue that people have is, who are these two witnesses? Are they identified? And there are some, and this is where the commentators have a fun time too, and it will make your head spin the more you read about it if you're reading in commentaries. There are some that will say that they are Moses and Elijah. Moses representing the books of the law, and Elijah representing the prophets. The law and the prophets represented there.
That happened at the Transfiguration, right?
Okay, yeah, that happened. That was there at the Transfiguration, and that's another proof that they cite for that.
Right.
Problem.
Yes, God appointed these two persons to, but he didn't give them a name. They have no name.
Okay.
And their purpose was to preach to the Jews that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, their Messiah.
Okay, agree. What I'm trying to do is explain there are some that try to do this, and I'm going to show you why that position is a safer one to take, that we don't know their identity. That's what I'm trying to get to. Okay, so if you'll just kind of bear with me, I want to take you through and I want to show you how the names just don't work. Okay, that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, so if you look at just consider for a moment that the possibility that these two are Moses and Elijah. The problem with that is that these two guys will die, correct? Both these two witnesses, if you go down to, and we're going to get into this next week, it says that in verse 7, when they finish the testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And if you're not sure whether that's a physical death or a spiritual death or a symbolic death, verse 8, their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So they have dead bodies. Okay, so they're dead.
I thought they strung them up.
The problem now, staying with this, the idea of the two witnesses being Moses and Elijah, Moses has already died once, hasn't he?
Right.
Well, actually, we think he died because nobody knows where he's buried.
Well, we know he died because the Bible says he died. You go and look at the last passage in Deuteronomy. It says, and Moses died and God buried him, and we don't know where he's buried. But yes, he did die. Okay, so, but if you look at Hebrews 9 and verse 27, and I've just got this on the screen if you want to take a look, the writer there says, and it is appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment. So you'd have Moses dying twice. People don't die twice. But here's the problem. Here's the problem. You got to explain Lazarus. All right. So there's that. Okay. So there's problems saying, yes, it's Moses and Elijah, and problems saying, no, it's not Moses and Elijah.
How about Enoch?
All right. Now let's go back and let's look again. The other theme, as Jack just perfectly segued for me, is that it might be Moses and, or not Moses, but Elijah and Enoch, because those are the two guys that didn't die in the Old Testament. Neither one died. Okay, so here it is, they die. Okay, so it would stand to reason, wouldn't it, that those two are the ones that came in and preached, because they haven't died and now they die. Okay, the problem with that, again, with the passage that I just showed you, Hebrews 9:27, is now you have to factor in the church that was raptured, that was alive at the time of the rapture. They didn't die.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so the whole notion of the men being appointed to die once and then come the judgment, you have to explain the church, the raptured church, the people that were alive at that time. Okay, so if your head's starting to hurt right now because of all of that, my point with that, that's the reason the Lord didn't tell us who these guys are. He left it obscure for a reason. And that is, we don't need to know who these guys are. Okay, so and I'm telling you this because if you study the book of Revelation in the future, there's going to be that discussion. I sure as shooting that you're going to get into that discussion, and somebody's going to come up with, well, that's Moses and Elijah, and they're going to give you that reason. And then you can say, yeah, but what about Lazarus? Or, yeah, but what about it's appointed for men to die once and then come judgment? You know, there's a lot of things that just don't fit there. And the same thing is with Enoch and Elijah. Okay, but what do you do with the raptured church? You know, there's a number of things that just don't fit. So there's nothing nice and neat with it. And so the point is, this is the reason God obscured their identity. For one, it's not worth discussing. And sometimes, you know, sometimes you get into Bible studies and people get off on rabbit trails that really lead to nowhere, and it really doesn't do any of us any good. You ever been in a Bible study like that? Well, that's what this is. It's a dead end trail. It doesn't help in your understanding of any of this, because they have a message. The message is Jesus is Messiah, and you need to believe in him and receive that gift of everlasting life. That's their message. Okay. Now, it's not a popular message, because if you remember, we're in the 7 years of tribulation. There is no more church. There is no more of any of that. The church has been raptured. We're with the Lord in heaven at that point. And so their message is going to be every bit as unpopular as the message of life in Jesus is right now. In fact, probably even more so. Not going to be very popular. So what's going to happen with these people, with these two guys? They're going to be attacked. They're going to be attacked. And you see what happens with some groups of people when they hear a message, or they see or hear a position that they don't agree with and they don't like. They try to silence that voice. They try to silence that position. Well, look at what's going to happen to them if they try that with these two guys in verse 5. Anyone wants to harm them? Fire proceeds from their mouth and devours them.
Like a flamethrower, I bet.
Burns them to a crisp. Now, it's interesting that you see that parallel, and that's what Elijah did. Remember that in the book of First Kings, the king sent commanders to Elijah and said, Elijah, come down off of this mountain. The king wants to see you, meaning the king wants to arrest you and have you executed. And he called the commanders called him man of God. Man of God, come down off of that mountain. The king wants to see you. And remember what Elijah said? If I'm a man of God, let fire come down and burn you all to a crisp. And what happened? Fire came down from heaven, burned them all to a crisp. King sent a second group out. Man of God, the king says for you to come down. Elijah said it again. If I'm a man of God, let fire come down and burn you all up. Fire comes down from heaven, burns them all up. King sends a third guy out. Third guy's kind of figuring a pattern right now. He's hearing the reports, and so he comes to Elijah and says, sir, please don't burn me up, but really, I'm in a bad spot. The king wants to see you, but and I really don't want to do this because I'm scared to death, but don't burn me up. And so the Lord says to Elijah, go on down with him. So, okay, I'll go down. So that's rather reminiscent, isn't it, of what you read in verse 5. Anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth, devours their enemies. It's another reason why some people think it's Elijah, but it's not. And so notice what else John says. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. So they are burned to a crisp. No other way, but they're burned to a crisp. They try to harm these two witnesses.
Just like a flamethrower.
But now you start to see the other part, and this is, again, this is another reason why people who try to identify these guys as Moses and Elijah, they'll say Moses was the other guy because look at verse 6. He says, these have power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy. Well, that's actually more like Elijah. And then he says they have power over waters to turn them to blood. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
Someone else did that too once upon a time. Read the book of Exodus. That'd be Moses, to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with all plagues. Again, very familiar, but notice this, as often as they desire. So these guys go one up on the authority and the power, because all the other servants of God have to wait on the Lord for direction as to when. But here the Lord gives them carte blanche and says, use it as often as you see fit. And so they just go one plague after another. They just pick the plague and they pick the location. They pick for how long, and they just go at it. So not only are they preaching, not only are they protecting themselves, but they are sending plagues over the earth at the same time that all of these other judgments are happening. 7 seals, 6 trumpets. All this is going on concurrently. It's working together during these 7 years. So you get the feeling, don't you, that the earth is not going to be a very pleasant place to be in those first 3.5 years. It's going to really be hard to find a good vacation spot. It's going to be really hard to find a place to take a cruise to. Not going to be a nice place. All right, so looking at this, I may have lost you with some of this. Let's go back and see where your questions might be, or something that doesn't make sense, or maybe something that you're wondering. Or maybe an observation.
No, they carried out their purpose, and they won over a lot of Jews, many.
Well, we know they won 144,000. That somewhere, maybe because of their influence, 144,000 came to faith. But many more, because they were out witnessing, they were out preaching and testifying, weren't they? So that kind of multiplied its way out. So there was, you're right, Jim, there was quite the soul harvest there. What about the timing of this? Does that all make sense? Does that all seem to fit, or is it foggy somewhere?
They apparently won over the amount that God wanted them to, because in the last part of the first 3.5 years, the Antichrist took over and saw that they were getting in his way, and he killed him.
Yeah, there's quite a convergence when you get to that 3.5 year mark. Quite a convergence of things that are happening, and the further we go in this book, the more that you see happening that's going on, and there's many things that are happening at the same time or in similar times. But remember, all of this is happening between trumpet number 6 and trumpet number 7. Okay, so we only go up to this far in chapter 11. Okay, so again, these 2 witnesses, we've started back at the very beginning of the 7 years, and we move from there to the 3.5 year mark. So that 3.5 year mark has to be, it seems as though it will occur somewhere between trumpet 6 and trumpet 7.
How is the 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years, compared to the last 3.5 years? Quite a bit of difference, isn't there?
Well, when you go and look at what the 7th trumpet does, the 7th trumpet ushers in the 7 bowls.
Right.
And if you want to see how severe things get with the 7 bowls, then you go ahead and read chapter, I think it's chapter 15, chapter 16. And you start reading and seeing what happens there. And where the trumpet judgments took 1/3 of things and destroyed 33%, 33 1/3%, however you want to do it. They're destroying 1/3. The bowls finish it out. The bowls do the whole shooting match.
So once the church is taken out, is
so
that when the tribulation starts?
So it's more severe. I would say the church is taken out before the 7 years.
Right. That's what I mean.
Not at the 3.5 year mark.
So the church is taken out, then the tribulation starts.
Well, no, not necessarily. Again, I'll bring you back to Daniel 9:27 or Daniel 9:20. Go to Daniel 9:27. Look at that first sentence. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week.
That's 3.5 years, right?
So what I would submit to you is that's when the clock starts, is when the beast of the earth strikes that contract with them, with the nation of Israel. For 7 years, will establish the temple, and you can begin that. You can begin your sacrificial system. Now, here's what is very interesting, just to kind of sit and speculate, and that's all I'm doing at this point right now. So I just want to make that clear. When you look right now at what it would take to build the temple, you would have to completely placate and satisfy the Islamic world, the entire Islamic world, and convince them that it's in their best interest to let the Jews build a temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
That is a tough situation.
That's a tough sell, isn't it?
Yeah.
That would be a very tough sell. And so anyone who's able to broker that deal and make that deal, boy, he is going to have the whole world as his oyster. Everybody's going to listen to him, and everybody's going to want to do what he suggests, because he's able to broker a deal like that.
So he'd be the beast.
He would be the beast. He would be it fits in with the rider on the white horse.
Yeah, right.
You know, he's a rider with a bow. He has no arrows, which means he's not taking his kingdom by violent means. And it says a crown was given to him. He didn't have to take it, but it was given to him. So it sounds like all of that kind of converges, and you can see where it might happen. And I use that word, and I stress the word might, because I do not want to make the mistake of saying this is how it's going to be, because nobody knows how that's going to go down. But I could see how that could happen. I could see it as a possible scenario. But of course, if the Lord tarries and this doesn't happen in 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, then this is just pure speculation. We're no different than the same guys who sat around the campfire 1,000 years ago, theorizing the very same thing that we're doing, only in their context.
Yeah.
You know, so I throw that as kind of a little caution flag. We can't get too happy and think, oh, this is the last times, and oh, the Lord's going to be, you know, he could come, and we have to be ready for that. But we can't be so ethnocentric, I guess is the big word, that we think that, you know, ours has to be the last generation. Ours has to be the end times, because everything just fits. I can say for certain we're 1,000 years closer today than we were 1,000 years ago.
That's for sure.
And we're going to be a day closer to it tomorrow than we are today. But we don't know the hour. We don't know the time, do we? We don't know any of that.
Well, Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour when I return.
So the best we can do at that point is speculate. But what we can do is we look at what is written and say, we can see how this goes down. We can see how this is going to transpire and what's going to be taking place at that time. And we can see that Jerusalem's going to be an epicenter in the world,
Right.
more so arguably than any other city in the world.
Or even right now, everybody's after Jerusalem.
Well, there's always been that eye towards Jerusalem. And
Right.
in our lifetime, in our respective lifetimes, there have been more eyeballs cast on Jerusalem and watching what happens there than any generation over the last, I'd say, maybe 2,000 years. Probably. But that's not to say that Jerusalem wasn't a prize back 1,000 years ago. I mean, you had the whole wars, all of the wars between the Muslims and the European countries fighting over Jerusalem and who would control it.
Right.
Lots of blood spilt on that. All right, so good. What else in this might you have a question on that you're wondering about? What about the two witnesses? Where else do they fit? Do you see where they fit into this and their work up to this point? Because next week we're going to break it down a little bit more, and we're going to see what happens to them and what happens in the aftermath, and we'll put that on the timeline.
Yeah, that was one question I was going to ask, but you're going to talk about it next week. But that was, how in the world could they ever kill those two guys if they could spit fire out of their mouth?
Okay, well, you'll if you the more that you read about the beast, the man of sin, the beast from the sea, and we're going to talk about that because there's some opinions about this beast in verse 7, where he talks about the beast that ascends from out of the bottomless pit. Who is that? And so we'll talk about that. We'll have some discussion on that and delve into that a little bit more. But it's quite the spectacle that this guy's going to overcome these two and kill them.
Well, it's an amazing thing he can make a deal with the Arabs so to build that temple on the same place where their mosque is.
You're doing just what I told you not to do, Jack. Don't do that. It's only a speculation. We could see if it were to happen today, how that could fit.
It's going to take a heck of a long time to build that temple.
Okay, but
no. The point is that
one
temple,
more time.
Yeah, that temple wouldn't be anywhere near as big as Solomon's temple, and it could be built in a matter of months.
But hear me one more time.
If it was going to be built.
Well,
it's already said it's going to be built, and the Antichrist will make himself God on the temple.
Okay, but don't make the mistake of equating everything to the right now, the here and now. Okay, that the beast is going to make a deal with the Arabs. No, I didn't say that. No, I said you could see where that might fit if it were to happen today. But we don't know that it's going to happen today, do we? Correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we need to, I want to make that clear. Okay, don't let your mind go down that road and think that's what I said, because I didn't. Okay, I said you can see how that could fit if it were to happen today. But again, we don't know if it's going to happen today or tomorrow or in the near future.
Or 100 years from now.
But yeah, that's the Dome of the Rock is built on the original temple, so they'd have to move this new temple off to the side. Is there something to that?
Well,
I'm just speculating.
I don't think they'd allow that.
Well, one of the interesting things that happened, I want to say almost 20 years ago, You might remember he was prime minister in Israel. His name was Ariel Sharon. He also was a general in the Israeli army. Before he became prime minister, he was on a tour with some other folks, and they were around that old Jerusalem area, and they were in that quarter where the Temple Mount is. And he made mention of the fact, yeah, that's where the temple will be built. And the Muslims that were with him just went sideways with it. And it just ushered a whole new level of violence and battles and skirmishes and all the rest. And it hasn't ever settled down since. And so the point to that is that to even mention that now just puts gasoline on a fire. So if it were to happen today, for me, it's easy to see how that would fit together. I could see it happen, no problem. But I don't know that that's the way it's gonna happen. Don't know. None of us do.
I mean, if we're speculating, I mean, we don't even know if when this does happen, how powerful a force that the Muslim population will be at that time.
You're right. We have no
So,
idea.
you know, we're looking at this would be some feat, you know, but we're looking at it in terms of today, the relationship, but that may change greatly in 1,000 years or whatever.
It could be very different in 50 years or 100 years or 200 years, couldn't it? Everything can change. Oh yeah, without question. And to see how different things are, if you ever want some fun reading, and that's what I mean by fun reading. Back when I was a kid, 1960s, Dale might even have this book called The Late Great Planet Earth.
Oh yeah, I read it.
By Hal Lindsey.
Right.
Yeah, I got it.
All of my seminary professors cringe. All my theology professors cringe when the name Hal Lindsey was brought up. They just, oh. And when you read his book, how he tried to slot in the world events in 1969 to what was happening in Revelation, you know, he sold a lot of books, but to go back and read it now is pretty fun. It's pretty
Wasn't he the
amusing.
guy that said this generation will not pass away till all these things are fulfilled, which includes
Sounds
the
like,
coming of the Lord?
yeah, I think that's it. So all that to say, it's an interesting read. It's pretty amusing. So you kind of look at that and laugh, and you say, oh, okay, that's why we leave this in the condition, in the tense that it's in, and we don't try to slot it with present day equivalents.
Well, actually, Pastor, several years ago, Hal Lindsey used to have a TV show.
Wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, he did.
Wouldn't doubt it. His name's, he's got name recognition for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. Any other questions or observations on this? Of course, if you want to go deeper, you need some more, you know, there's something else that you're wrestling with, fire me an email or a text or something, and we'll go into it a little bit more. And if there's something I didn't explain really well and left you in the dark or made you more confused than what you were when you began tonight, let me know. Let me see if I can help with that. All right.
Okay, sounds good to me.
So I'm going to end my share. And then I'm going to, after I stop the recording, we're going to pray, we'll be dismissed. And then I will send the link out via email, and I'll have this posted in Facebook, in our Facebook group. And so people can get in touch with that and access it one of those two ways. All
Okay.
right.